Okay, now we are working. So I want to welcome you, the folks that are already here in the room and our presenter. My name is Bethany Welch, and I'm the Justice and Peace Fellow for the Conference of Major Superiors of Men. On this Friday afternoon, this is our fourth webinar in the skill building series that is designed to equip the justice and peace promoters and ministers for various men's religious communities across the country, as well as other organizations and affiliates who might be on the call today. So we've had sessions on kind of lobbying and tax exempt status early on in the fall. We've talked about anti-racism policies and practices. We recently had a wonderful session with Kim Daniels on how to write an op-ed. And then today we have Ashley Feasley with us to help us think through how to plan and facilitate a virtual lobby visit. At this moment in U.S. history, we know that a functional democracy is reliant on intentional and thoughtful preparation and participation. And so we have this opportunity now at the beginning of a new congressional season, of a new presidential administration, to really think through how to bring voices and perspectives to our elected officials in a way that really honors the governing process and allows voices to be heard and messages to be shared. Ashley is just the person to help us think through this aspect of faithful citizenship, and certainly recognizing that both the pandemic and recent incidents at the Capitol may really limit access to our DC folks for a period of time. So this idea of virtual lobbying and virtual advocacy is critical. Ashley is the director of the Office of Migration Policy and Public Affairs at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Prior to being with USCCB, she worked as the director of advocacy for Clinic, has taught at Fordham and Catholic University of America Law School. So we're really grateful for her time. Just by way of kind of logistics, we will be using the chat for questions for Ashley, and I'm happy to facilitate those on mic once we see them and can kind of sort through them in case there are common themes emerging. Ashley, does it make sense to kind of have you start and then ask questions towards the end? Okay, we'll go ahead and use that format. So again, thank you for being with us. We're going to try to be kind of right around 1:45 to finish because I know many folks are interested in being on the vigil with Catholic Mobilizing Network if that still proceeds at 2. So again, Ashley, thanks so much for joining us and welcome.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Very quickly, I'm going to go through some quick points, and then I'm hopeful we can have a conversation because these days we're all doing a lot of Zooming and it's important to dialogue, not just to one-way talk. So I'm here to talk about the importance of you engaging as a constituent and being involved in the lawmaking process here in Washington. As Bethany points out, this is a difficult moment. Many people feel left out of the political process, regardless of their, political, where they fall in the political spectrum. I'm here to say now more than ever, we need to double down and be there and be present and be able to use our voice. On the issue I work on, and I get to work with Bethany and CMSM, immigrants and refugees, this takes on a particular lens because sometimes some of the people that we and other leaders in the church are advocating for, they can't be advocating on their own. And you can say that with a lot of the other individual populations, that sometimes our work, bringing these issues to the forefront, may be the only avenue. So I have 6 quick points that we're going to go through. I do want to say, as a matter of discussion, we have a sheet on the Justice for Immigrants website, a PDF about how to set up a legislative visit. I will be sending this to Bethany for you to follow up on. I urge you, and this is a plug for the Justice for Immigrants Network. It is the Bishop's grassroots campaign. We celebrated 15 years here this summer. It was the grassroots campaign to help bring reform and human dignity and decency to immigrants and refugees. Please sign up. We have a newsletter. We have several groups. One includes the core group, which is heads of office for all of the leading Catholic national groups, of which CMSM is a participant. So please, we're trying to update the website and be as present to you as possible. So I've got 6 points and I'm going to go through them, and then I'm hopeful you can ask questions and we can talk. My first point is all politics are local. Please do not think for a moment that you are not important in this process. Actually, they don't really want to hear from me, they want to hear from you. Why? Because you are their constituent. You are the voter in their district or in their state, if we're talking about representative or senators. And to this end, I urge you to please utilize that and remember that all politics are local. You are the person that they want to hear from. And, taking that point a step further, that means personalizing your visit to talk about your district or your state, what you see, what's going on in your parish, what's going on in your community. And so I urge you to always remember that you are wanted and needed in this process, and that the locality and your involvement in the district that this individual is running for is always first and foremost when these visits are being set up and when, frankly, decisions are being made based on these types of visits. The second point is research. When you go into a job interview, if you have the benefit of seeing who's interviewing you, you try and do a little research about who it is or about the organization that you are interviewing. This is no different. I'm not asking people to prepare like they would for a job interview, but knowing a little bit about the lawmaker that you're going to meet with, it really is helpful. What party are they in? Do they have a general disposition on the issue you're meeting? You don't have to do a deep dive. You can do a quick, frankly, Google search. If it's a representative, what diocese are they involved in, or what parishes do they have? Their faith tradition is always an important thing to think about and kind of see where you can meet them on this issue. And then, for those of us who work in DC, we also take it a step further and we think about what positions of leadership or, issues or things that they're working on. You can always reach out to Bethany or to myself in the area of immigrants and refugees to help get some of that bio information. But I urge you to do that preliminary research before you go in. The third is organizing. And I mean this in both sense of the word, to be organized in the administration of your meeting, but also to organize people to come with you for your meeting. Again, I'm going to speak from my base of experience, which is immigrants and refugees. We always try to have in our local meetings somebody from an impacted community if they are comfortable, if they feel okay doing that. Why? Well, there's nothing like a human story and an example in real time to give contours to whatever talking points or policy bullets or numbers that we're talking about. And so that's my example of organizing in the second way. Think about who is a good team to make a good meeting. And then organizing your meeting in the sense of once you've got the individuals who can or are willing to participate with you, be organized in how you want to set up your meeting. You staffers are very, very rarely will you ever get to meet with a member. It's not personal to you. You just won't. If you do, that's a rare exception, and it's wonderful that you get to do that. Their staffers, while they're not, the stakeholders themselves, are very busy. They normally organize their schedule in 30-minute increments, increasingly in the era of Zoom. So you basically have 30 minutes kind of to make your point. Sometimes you will get lucky and it'll be longer, but you should always be thinking about my organizing in terms of who am I bringing to the table for the meeting, and then my organizing of how am I organizing my meeting? Who's going to give the introduction? Is there an ask to this meeting in terms of something that you want the lawmaker to do? Who's asking? Who's giving that? Is there a personal story or tie-in? You want time for that. So think about also wanting the staffer to respond. We want dialogue. So my fourth point kind of ties on that 30-minute increment point that I raised, and this is be flexible. Normally meetings go 30 minutes and you can make this organized agenda, but sometimes, whether it's technology, whether it's scheduling snafus, whether it's people in your meeting not being able to make it last minute. Sometimes it just doesn't work out like that. I'll give you an example. I was supposed to attend a meeting with some Catholic advocates for Senator Lindsey Graham's staff, and this was in September. It was on a refugee resettlement issue. We had organized our meeting with who's the members that were going to be in the meeting. We'd organized our agenda. We'd done a little bit of research. I couldn't get into the Zoom. So, I just want to say, our advocates, they did a wonderful job. I was able to text with them and, be backup, but sometimes our best laid plans, they just don't happen. So I urge you to keep in mind that, sometimes it doesn't work out. The fifth and sixth thing are about after the meeting. It's so important in life, and I would say particularly in this context of following up and not being a stranger. Staffers sometimes take days where all they do are meetings on a half-hour increment. If you start at 8 and go to 5 and divide each hour by 2, it's a lot of meetings. We do this email exchange or business card exchange and then move on. The best advocates are people that follow up. They may not have had the slickest presentation in the meeting, but they sent a follow-up email. They included points. And the other thing I'll say about following up is being transparent. There are many times when I'm asked a question that I may not know the answer, and I say, I don't know, I will get back to you. It actually gives me a reason to get back to them on points. So the sixth and last point, and then I'm hopeful that we can discuss, because I'm sure there's a lot of questions, and this is just some general guidelines. But the sixth and last point is to not be a stranger. In addition to following up to that meeting and sending the email, these individuals, they work for you. They are your representative. They are your senator. Votes were given for them to represent you as a constituent. Whether you voted for them or not, that is what they've been tasked for. And so reminding them of your presence, of your interests on a particular issue or several issues, and also highlighting what you are doing. Are you, again, I'm going to talk in the context of immigrants and refugees. Are you hosting a movie viewing night about immigration reform or refugees? Are you celebrating National Migration Week? Or are you doing something to honor World Refugee Day? Let them know, invite them. Are you, very unhappy with something recently that came up? Politely let them know. Follow up. Don't be a stranger to the office, because I think, when you need to visit them again, when there are times to initiate real action on your whatever issue that you are mobilizing on, you don't want to be a stranger for the first time. You want to be someone that the office has some familiarity with. So those are the 6 points. I have, like I said, a sheet that goes through how you can set up a meeting. My office is always willing to help, and I'll put my email address in, and you can get it from Bethany. But I'm hopeful to hear actually from you some of your questions or observations, and that we could have maybe a dialogue.
Thanks so much, Ashley. So we have this goofy setup where we have like this webinar platform where it's not a meeting platform. So I can't unmic folks, unfortunately, but we definitely, please put it in the chat. And while maybe people are thinking of some questions, I have a couple that I thought of. So please, if you're on the webinar, just enter into the chat and we'll read those off and address those. So you mentioned, you'll kind of have a sheet to share, but really on the basics, like who am I calling? If I'm, want to meet with my senator, am I looking for a chief of staff? Is there a scheduler? And again, thinking about virtual versus, a visit in state or in town. So yeah, what do you recommend?
Sure. So I first off advise that you call the in-district office. If you don't know the email of the person, email works really well because you have a record of requesting the meeting, but you may not have the email address. So I advise that you call the in-district office, not the Washington office. Identify yourself and explain that you're hopeful to meet on X issue and set up a meeting. If you're unable to get a hold of the district office, it's not that big of a deal. Sometimes district offices are slammed. Then reach out to the Washington office and say, I tried the district office and I wasn't able to. When you explain, here's what I will say about the staff person you meet with. I think that there is definitely, as in life and all workplaces, a pecking order of seniority as it relates to, who you're meeting with. I also just want to say that, obviously trying to meet with the highest level person possible is important, but at the same time, making sure that you have a good contact and a good follow-up with the office is just as important. I'll give you a case example. Recently, we were able to work on the COVID-19 relief bill and get eligibility for certain mixed immigrant status families, some of the stimulus money, which frankly they should have been included in the whole time. A Republican Senate office that I worked with a lot on this, I was not speaking to the legislative director or the chief of staff. I was speaking to like one of the legislative correspondents. So not the front line, but certainly not the highest level person. But this individual was tapped into what they were doing, and they were responsive to me in my one-on-one engagements. And that is just as important, frankly, as some of these other things. And the reason I think that it's important is the reality is sometimes your legislative director or your chief of staff, they're just not going to be able to engage you consistently. They might miss your email because of the volume of emails that you get. So I would say I wouldn't worry about that. I do my best, to try and obviously if I can meet with the chief of staff, I do, but I don't get hung up on what the person's status level is. The next thing I will say is, I think it's really important when you send the email, to explain who you are. So I am Ashley Feasley. I live in Maryland, so I would point out to Senator Van Hollen or Cardin that I'm a resident there. Jamie Raskin is my representative. So I would say I'm from Maryland. I'm a constituent. I would also point out, I work at the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops, and I'm emailing in that capacity, or maybe I'm emailing as a citizen or a parishioner. I would just identify who I am. I want to talk, I'm interested in speaking to, a representative or a staff member of Senator or Representative X on this issue. So I would say perhaps on immigration reform, particularly X, Y, and Z, period. I likely will be, I'd be interested in setting up a meeting for a coalition of individuals. Please let me know your availability for these days. I am happy to follow up with you on who will be attending the meeting with me once we set up a date. So that I think is very important. Who you are, your connection to the district or the state, who you may be representing or identifying with, your general topic of interest for the meeting, a specific topic if possible, and then an interest of a time frame for a certain set of meetings. Here's another one. If you don't hear back, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get the meeting. It means you need to send another email. This is an area, and I'm sure you're all very busy. I think I receive conservatively 600 emails a day. So I'm sure that they receive far more than I do. Send another email. You might even follow up to the email you originally sent and say, maybe this got lost, or I'm just following up. I would really like to meet with you. If you don't hear back from the second email, contemplate calling the office. to engage, or reach out to Bethany as a resource, or like I said, in the issue of immigration, let us know. We can try and help get you a meeting. Normally, as a constituent, you will be hearing back after a second email. A call is also helpful. Do you want me to continue, or are there questions?
Yeah, that's really helpful. I don't see any questions yet, but please do. I'm looking at the list though, because I can see, who's on, and I know a couple of people were on the JFI national call earlier this week. And so if you were thinking about, for example, the JFI, and I'll post it in the chat, the, new platform, the transition documents, and you were setting up a meeting, do you pick, 2 or 3 things from that list to mention? Is it a general ask? Thinking about a new administration, new representatives, what might be your tactic going in, particularly messaging around immigration at this time?
Sure. So you are in luck because we're then beginning of a new session. So you kind of get a freebie interview of a freebie meeting of I would like to introduce myself or get reacquainted if you have met before in the past, and kind of also hear Senator Representatives' thoughts about immigration. I'm a member of the Justice for Immigrants Coalition. We have some transition documents, include them in the links or on the attachments. We can help you do this. I'm interested in hearing about the senator's, opinions or, feelings on acting on immigration reform. So, for example, we know that President-elect Biden will be introducing an immigration reform bill. Maybe that's the intro point of the conversation. I think this is a part where you, on your organizing, and then on your being flexible, that you kind of think about the circumstances. Who along the group that you may be having the meeting, is there somebody there who has a real passion issue or very pertinent issue? Maybe that's the focus point of your meeting. Similarly, on the being flexible point, you may go into a meeting ready to talk about ending detention and improving access to asylum. And this individual may want to hear actually about what you think about giving dreamers a path to citizenship. You need to be flexible to seize the moment. You don't have to be an expert in these points, but you need to be able to say, yes, we support a path to citizenship for dreamers. Yes, we're interested. If they ask you a question you don't know, I'm happy to follow up. I also want to highlight some of our concerns and commitment to the detention issue and talking about asylum. That's known as a pivot. So you go from what they want to talk about, giving it its due merit, to what you have prepared to talk about.
That's really helpful. There is a detailed question here. Can you see that? You want to run through that? Okay, perfect.
All right, I'm just quickly going to read this. We have a group in Washington that has been meeting regularly for the last 18 months with the senior legislative directors of Senators Tammy Baldwin and Ron Johnson, but have found that nothing we say changes anything either does. Johnson is one of the worst people in Congress on immigration, and Baldwin has been unwilling to speak out more strongly on this issue. Maybe that will change for her now that the Dems have more power, but honestly, since we have, they're very defensive about asking her to speak out because that is a political calculation. Suggestions for taking things to a new level. Because of the pandemic, we can't stage a demonstration or sit in. How can we bring more pressure to bear on both our friend and our opponent?
And I just want to clarify, it's in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So first off, I think this is a kind of a split ticket state that we're seeing a lot of what you're talking about, Mark. So you're not alone, first and foremost. And the other thing I want to say is me too. I cultivated a relationship with Senator Johnson's chief counsel on the Homeland Security Government Accountability Committee, the HSGAC committee that Senator Johnson was a chairman. And I had a great opportunity to speak to this individual, and I actually had arranged a number of meetings between Sister Norma Pimentel and Senator Johnson, and a bishop and Senator Johnson. As you can see, I think my advocacy clearly failed. That being said, it doesn't mean that we stop. I think them knowing who you are and listening to you, ironically, is kind of really important, in part because I'm not certain that everybody doing immigration advocacy is doing that anymore. So you may be one of the few perspectives that they're actually hearing from. Now, that doesn't make your task any easier, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to see incremental progress. But I do want to say, I urge you to continue to meet with these individuals. You want them to know who you are, regardless of whether they kind of follow up with you with what you want. It is kind of the steady climb on this issue. And on the immigration issue, it is more than just getting the legislation or action. It's a movement, So, but I get where you're coming from on, why aren't we getting some traction? So here's a couple things that when I'm kind of stuck in a position that you're in, I take a look at just to give some context. One, in the case of Senator Johnson, we are seeing somebody who's going to be up for re-election in 2 years, which changes senators' behaviors. We also are seeing a state that's under intense scrutiny, and you don't need me to tell you that. You know this as the resident. So I try to think about issues where can I get maybe incremental support or follow up on certain pieces, as well as maintaining that relationship and that push. There were a number of things that we actually were able to get the office to be engaged on. One was the issue of the treatment of pregnant women. Senator Johnson, that's the pro-life issue is very important to him. And so they did actually follow up with the Department of Homeland Security on a number of questions that we had, which I thought was good. Now, that's a private situation. That's not external advocacy, but it is internal advocacy. And we don't know if your constant engaging them was not a factor to me being able to get them to do this. And that's another piece. On the Senator Baldwin, I think that's the same tactic, looking at kind of, and you've already outlining it, a change in kind of where maybe she'll have space to speak out. And this goes back to this point about all politics are local and research. I don't know much about Senator Baldwin. I've only met with the office several times. What is her background? Where are her issues that you maybe can get some movement on? That is where I would kind of do my homework to engage on. Also, who motivates her? Is it the faith community? Is it the business community? Is it the legal services community? Because, that's also another thing to think about, is partnering up and getting different kind of people to work with you. So those are a couple things that I would say. The point about not being able to stage a demonstration or sit-in, I think, is well taken. And so this is an instance where I would point out there's no excuse now why the senator couldn't meet with a person from the impacted community. We're all remote now. We're all kind of engaged. And even 15 minutes of hearing the testimony of someone, I think, is a really important use of capital. It puts the impacted community front and center. It also gives a human face to this in a way that, so much of the politics of immigration are able to wipe away. And so that would be an ask I would have for, the senators. The other thing I would say is, this bill is coming up. We're not certain that, that this is going to pass. Immigration reform bills have yet to pass since we had, major reform in the 1980s, and then we had a kind of terrible reform in 1996. So, where is she on this? What is her position going to be? I think once the bill drops, I would begin a steady drumbeat campaign on her in particular about kind of what is going to be her position on this. If there's opposition, what is that opposition? And also just a general thing I would say is, what is your role in the coalition of influencing Senator Baldwin? Are you the outside activists? It sounds like you could be with the demonstrations and the sit-in. Are you the internal inside person who talks with her and sees the area of involvement? Are you, one of the preferred messengers for this individual? Again, that is the type of thinking that I urge you to also think about in terms of if you're stuck in your advocacy, to kind of think about next level. And that is, I feel, a form of organizing and strategy. With your kind of request here, we can certainly do a deep dive like that on Senator Baldwin and get back to you through Bethany. I don't know much more about her specifically, but I think you are raising an example that many people feel. I know I feel that way. So.
Ashley, something that, whether it's been going to the Hill with the Catholic Social Ministry Gathering, CRS, or any, JFI or local state visits, I often will front with a sister, right? Because so many of the staffers went to grade school or went to, Catholic university, and they have this sort of familiarity or connection or warm feeling about a sister. Could be a really nurturing sister, could be a really fierce sister. But I'm thinking about, like, in Mark's question, he said, we're lacking kind of like the bishop's backing or a pastor. I feel like there might be other ways sometimes to come at the Catholicness, right? Or that sort of feeling of faith engagement. And, again, I wonder if there are other roles and other strategies people have used that have been effective. Yeah.
So I think Bethany raises a really good point. First off, I think that obviously support of the archdiocese and the bishop is super important. It doesn't always happen, and it's not necessarily because the bishop doesn't care about migration or the death penalty or environmental issues. That sometimes it's not that issue at all. Sometimes there are other factors that remain. It doesn't mean that you can't be representing that Catholic voice very kind of articulately. It also doesn't mean that there's not going to be further engagement from the archdiocese, later on, particularly if you and your coalition are leading and laying the groundwork. I would say that it's really important, I think, to Bethany's point, that yes, that the bishop and the archdiocese may represent a Catholic vote, but you do too, and your coalition does as well. And there are plenty of people who can speak, I think, very articulately about, our faith on this issue. So that is something I think just to remember. Again, you're a constituent, and that is really valuable here. The other thing I'll say about high-profile Catholics and engagement is, sometimes that's not as sustaining as continued engagement, and sometimes continued engagement is what gets us to the point where maybe a bishop or somebody else weighs in. The number of times I've met with certain target offices at House or Senate, as a representative of the USCCB, to have a face-to-face meeting with the bishop and the member. I mean, I would say if I've done 10 or 12 meetings to get one face-to-face meeting, that's an amazing return, just to think about for a minute. And it doesn't mean that the advocacy that I was doing is any more diminished. I do just want to say that kind of chipping away and keeping a personal relationship with the office, and that the office, here's something else to think about, and this is a little politico. All those people who call on the phone, they have to track people who call to talk about an issue and where they're from. So if you're not calling or you're not emailing, then the issue is not going to rise to the platform of this was one of the top 10 issues of the day. And I will say to you on the immigration issue, and this is not a Catholic or a faith-based problem, but an immigration, humane immigrant and refugee advocacy issue, we just never get the numbers that the anti-restrictionist group does. And so, urging people, I think, to be engaged and make those processes as incremental and frankly sometimes unsatisfying as it seems, it is part of the process of moving forward. I do agree, and it sounds like you have a lot of experience about it, but other forms of engagement are also very important. This is okay. Thanks for suggestions. You've highlighted I'm sorry, I'm reading it. I probably should read it out loud. You've highlighted our biggest problem, which is that we can't get our 270 members to all respond to appeals for emails, calls. We never seem to get participation for more than 10%. That is a reality, I think, of everybody. We have a database of 85,000, and that is used for major email blasts, and it's used for our really high level things. I would say a 12% click rate is really good. Ironically, we do get, and that means clicking, opening, doing, and facilitating the act. Ironically, we actually get much higher numbers than that, and I think it's from certain, I would call them superstars or connectors who pass on things. A lot of times they are men and women religious, so maybe we get clicks from others who aren't in our database, and so that I would say is a big deal. My solution to your 10% only is, I think that it's on us. I think, and I've talked about this with my team, I'm not certain that we're making this easy enough, and I'm not certain that we're making this pressing enough. Both. One, pressing, people get, I told you, I get 600 emails on average a day. And I if things aren't flashing or like top of my list, sometimes I don't respond. And I think a lot of people are like that. Easy enough, I feel I personally have learned the hard way that, a beautifully crafted talking points, but then you have to click into a link. It's just never going to work. Everyday people who don't do this for a living, they want to click a button and kind of move on, or have an easy access to, setting up a meeting. So my advice to you is to get, frankly, to either highly personalized engagement, like when we start doing grassroots. I'm going to ask Bethany for some of your information, because I'm going to, with her on copy, reach out to you personally, and also just much more streamlined kind of communication. So that's what I would say about the 10%. The bulletins, I'm happy if you want to send me an individual email to talk about this and get back to you. We have done a number of bulletins. For the USCCB, I think it's 3 to 4 weeks in advance. The last one we did was in the fall on the refugees, and making sure we got the presidential determination, just the importance of it. We did one on COVID. We also did one on DACA before the Supreme Court, and then one on World Refugee Day. That's what we've done kind of this year. I'm happy to talk about how to better kind of, one, if you have improvements to bulletins, I would love to hear your thoughts. And then two, talk about how we can expand access into that process.
Ashley, there's a question in the chat from Father Rufino about the kind of distinction between lobbying and advocacy. And we did do, I feel bad because we did do a webinar earlier in the year about this distinction. So maybe if you want to speak to it as well.
I'll speak a little, but I really think if you've done a deep dive on this, I think that it's important that the professionals speak to it. So lobbying formally, that like what is done by the USCCB, we have registered lobbyists that you register, and there is a formalness to the process. Advocacy doesn't have to just be Hill engagement. It is protest. It is, taking lawmakers to look at a parish that's operating, a citizenship workshop. It's, some of the strategies for organizing meetings to meet with representatives, or to send sign-on letters, or to do, a bilingual mass that is, has, immigrants and refugees as key participants. And though advocacy, I think, is a much more general, not necessarily tied to kind of the direct engagement with solely lawmakers and decision makers on specific policy. Advocacy is a much more wider. And then there are legal, literal definitions based on registering as lobbyists. Bethany, please take it away.
No, that's great, and that's a great summary for the context. The example I like to use is Network. You know, the Catholic Social Justice Lobby. There are two components to their organization. There's a 501c3, which will really do engagement and grassroots conversations and education, and then there's a separate 501c4, which is another IRS designation with different transparency and disclosures on fundraising, particularly, and how resources are spent, and that's the entity that puts more of its energies into direct activity around legislation. So I'm happy to, I can connect folks with the webinar that we did in the past about that, which has some wonderful slides that are really specific. I would say on average, it's rare to find a religious community or congregation that has a whole lobby, entity. Really, most folks are doing some advocacy and might go on a legislative visit and a lobby visit on a particular platform like Justice for Immigrants, but they're not spending the bulk of their time. And so there's no need to separately register and file for that.
I also want to make just a little bit of a distinction. So USCCB does do lobbying formally on this and other issues. But in the context of the Migration and Refugee Services Office, we are not an open solicitor of funds in terms of fundraising. We do have contracts and cooperative agreements with the federal government for the programs, the direct service programs that we work on. But I and others are not doing our advocacy for fundraising. And so it is an important, I think, distinction. There's nothing wrong with organizations that do that, but it is a little bit different.
So I think there's a conversation just in the chat, and I'll just mention it briefly about this level of urgency, the sense of things kind of being so pressing, and then, trying to maintain both engagement on that issue and helping people figure out which piece of a very complex conversation to grapple with. And so I think both for Mark in Wisconsin, and I think for other people perhaps on the webinar, I'm certainly happy to be a resource on that, and have done, this work for most of my career, particularly around migration. And certainly, Ashley at that higher level. But I do think something that I've seen be effective is just consistent and sustained engagement and through relationships. And it's reciprocal, right? So when your elected official wants to, have a conversation at your summer camp, I can think of, having hosted a community-based organization, bringing legislators through for the summer meals program in the city of Philadelphia, for example. And our, Congress folks really wanted to be there in the summer and have a photo op and have a conversation, but it's because we knew them for years on end around the issue of migration. So I think, there's some reciprocity there and some ongoing dynamics that are important to keep in mind, that it's the long game.
It is. And I will just say, never underestimate the power of saying thank you, or also saying we can agree to disagree, but I'm here to talk about X. So look, you've got, a noted individual who used to work at the USCCB, John Carr. We used to talk about being a true Catholic means you're politically homeless. There's very few lawmakers, if we're following all of the tenets and catechism of Catholicism, who fit neatly into adhering to all of those. There are plenty of issues where you meet with one lawmaker and you love them on, and other issues you don't. I think always remembering kind of awareness of that, but also we're here to talk about X. And then thank you, or a follow-up of just thanks for the meeting, or we're doing this. Offices really respond when they're not just hearing from you because you want something. It's just like anything else. And so here's an example that I frequently use. If I've seen a lawmaker do something that is positive on an area kind of tangentially related to the work that we're doing, a quick thanks, or I'd love to hear more. They love to talk about the work that they're doing. So, that's one that I think is really important, letting them know what an impact something they did was, or concern about something that they did. Concern, I would say targeted concern. So not, I hate that you voted against, what's an example I guess you could give? I hate that you didn't speak out against President Trump when he was separating children, and I wish that you had done more. Well, Yeah, but another way is, the family separation issue is just such a big deal to me and to many of us here in Wisconsin. We are connected to our Catholic network who is helping reunify families. There actually are some families here in Wisconsin. I really wish that you would consider to, the the humanity of these families, and why this policy is so harmful. Who's going to shut the door to something like that? I mean, I just, sometimes it's the framing. It doesn't mean that you're not saying, I think it's terrible that you are not standing up to a president separating families.
Well, great. Ashley, I'm so grateful for your time with us today and for the folks who asked questions on the chat. And it might be that in the future we can do more of the interactive dialogue webinars, but we started these at the beginning of Zoom land and we're getting kind of used to it. So,
Thank you.
and just to remind folks, there are some, wonderful things coming up in a variety of spaces that will move these conversations forward around engagement with our legislators and participation in democracy. So certainly sign up on the JFI page. We'll send out the materials from Ashley, and then so much of this type of conversation with your legislators is applicable across the Laudato Si platform, across racial justice, respect life. So many of the same principles of relationship, of contact, of communication. Doesn't matter what the issue is. It's really that process. So, and if you have any other questions, feel free to email me, but we will end there and appreciate your time, Ashley. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.